The ranch house had not changed much since I was a child. The stone walls stood weathered but firm, the front porch still creaked under the weight of boots, and the silence of the place pressed down heavier than the humid Texas air. Coming back here in my 30s, older and sharper than the girl who once ran barefoot across these fields, I felt the old unease wrapping around me like barbed wire. Sunday dinners in a town like Willow Ridge were never just meals. They were performances, rituals where everyone had their role, and everyone in town seemed to know it. Tonight was no exception. The table was already set when I walked into the dining room, the glow of the overhead light falling harshly on the polished wood. My father sat at the head, shoulders squared, his presence still commanding. My brother Crystal, tall and broad, claimed his place at his right side, as if the seat had been carved for him alone. I lingered near the doorway for a moment, scanning the familiar room, breathing in the scent of roast beef and cornbread that should have felt like home, but instead only reminded me of how much I didn't belong. "Sit down, Deborah," my father said without looking at me, his voice clipped, his hand gesturing vaguely toward the far end. The chair reserved for me had been pushed away from the circle, right up against the kitchen door. I noticed the shift instantly, subtle but deliberate. I remembered the same placement when I was 16, when relatives had gathered and I was expected to fetch and serve. Tonight was no different. I pulled the chair back, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the floor, a sound that seemed to irritate my father. He looked up briefly, his eyes narrowing as if I had disrupted something sacred. "You'll be comfortable there," he said flatly, returning his attention to Crystal. Across the table sat a family friend, Mr. Hollis, who had come by to talk cattle prices and weather. My father leaned toward him, nodding at Crystal with pride. "This is my son, the pride of this ranch, strong, reliable, everything a man should be." I waited for him to add something, anything, about me. A nod, a mention, even just my name. But silence followed, and the conversation moved on without me. In Texas, seats at the table mean more than comfort. They mean belonging. Tonight, my chair against the kitchen door screamed the truth I had known for years. I was part of the house, but not the family. The meal began. Plates were passed, dishes clattered, silverware tapped against china. Conversation flowed easily between my father and Crystal, laughter breaking out at small jokes only they seemed to understand. I found myself reaching for dishes, pouring tea, and refilling bowls before anyone asked, as though it was the role carved out for me long ago. "So, Crystal," my father said with a chuckle, slicing into his beef, "next year we'll have you managing the west pasture. Time you start making decisions for the herd." Crystal grinned, clearly enjoying the recognition. "I'm ready for it, Dad. Been ready a long time." I swallowed, wanting to contribute something of my own. "I actually closed a deal at work last week," I began, my voice steady. "A major account. It might expand into a regional partnership." My words hung in the air like smoke, ignored, brushed aside. My father didn't even glance at me. Instead, he turned back to Crystal, raising his glass slightly. "That's the kind of initiative I like to see. You've got your mother's determination, boy." The clinking of glasses followed, while my words dissolved into silence. The only sound left for me was the dull scrape of my fork against the plate. "Silence speaks volumes," the saying went. Tonight, silence screamed my irrelevance. I pushed peas around my plate, my appetite gone. I had known this script since I was young. My role was to serve, to be invisible, while Crystal was lifted high as the heir apparent. The irony stung deeper now, though, because I had built a life outside these walls, successful, independent, respected. Yet here, within this house, none of it mattered. A memory pulled me back to my teenage years, when a family reunion filled this very dining room. Back then, my father beamed as he told stories of Crystal's football games, his grades, his plans. I had tried to share that I'd won an essay contest, one that earned me recognition at school. My father cut me off with a dismissive wave. "Don't interrupt, Deborah. This is important." Laughter had followed, not cruel, but complicit. I understood even then. Favoritism wasn't just about love, it was about power distribution. Crystal was the boy who would carry the family name. I was the daughter who carried the family's silence. Families are like fudge, mostly sweet, but with a few nuts, I once read in a book by Irma Bombeck. I thought of that line now, the irony bitter. My family had long ago lost its sweetness, replaced with the taste of resentment and quiet despair. Still, I refused to crumble. I sat taller, holding my fork firmly, reminding myself that resilience was something I had forged away from here. I remembered the words of Maya Angelou that I once scribbled into a notebook. I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. So I watched. I observed. I recorded silently, storing every dismissive look, every stolen chance to speak. Not in ink, not on paper, but in my mind, because I knew direct confrontation here would only be dismissed as hysteria. Intelligence sometimes meant patience, waiting until your words mattered. The dinner dragged on, filled with their laughter, their plans for Crystal's future, while I remained the shadow at the end of the table. Finally, my father pushed back his chair, clapping Crystal on the back. "You'll do well, son. You'll make me proud." His glance swept over me briefly, as if I were no more than a servant gathering plates. He said nothing. I rose and began stacking dishes, carrying them into the kitchen, the clatter of porcelain matching the heaviness in my chest. As I returned for another round, Crystal leaned close, his voice low and mocking. "Don't forget, Deborah, you're just the help here." Heat surged through me, but I held my tongue. I carried the plates steadily, refusing to let them see me falter. In my mind, though, words blazed like fire. Every dismissal is a seed. One day, they'll regret underestimating me. Sunday afternoons in Willow Ridge had their own rhythm, and everyone in town knew it. Church bells, long tables of potluck dishes, and gatherings where gossip traveled faster than the wind across the fields. In towns like ours, community events weren't simply social, they were stages. Every handshake, every nod of approval, every whispered judgment shaped who mattered and who didn't. I'd grown up understanding that here, your family name was your currency. That afternoon, as I buttoned a plain blouse and looked in the mirror, I couldn't shake the weight pressing against my chest. My father had insisted we attend a dinner hosted by relatives, one that would double as a celebration. "It's important for appearances," he said earlier. I already knew what that meant. It meant a stage for Crystal to shine, and another opportunity for me to fade quietly into the backdrop. When we arrived, the smell of brisket and peach cobbler filled the hall. Long tables gleamed with plates and silverware, conversations humming like a hive. Children darted underfoot, elders traded stories at the corners, and at the center stood a cake. White frosting, tall candles, and a name written boldly across the top. "Happy birthday, Crystal." My stomach nodded. I stood there staring for a moment too long until my father's voice cut through. "Come on, Deborah, don't just linger." He ushered Crystal forward, his hand firmly on my brother's shoulder. Guests clapped as Crystal approached the cake. My father raised his glass. "This is my son," he said proudly, the words booming across the room. "The pride of this ranch. Strong, reliable, he'll carry our family's name for generations." Laughter and applause filled the room. Cameras flashed as Crystal grinned, knife poised to cut into the cake. I sat at the edge of the table, hands folded tightly in my lap, waiting for something, anything, that would include me. My name wasn't there, not even a small acknowledgement. Trying to lighten the sting, I forced a smile and said, "Guess I don't get a candle this year." My father didn't even glance my way. His voice cut, sharp and dismissive. "This night is about your brother." The guests chuckled awkwardly and turned back to Crystal, their cheers growing louder as he sliced the first piece. I sat frozen, humiliation crawling across my skin. Exclusion had always been my place at this table, but tonight it felt branded deeper. The next morning, the church pews filled as the sun filtered through stained glass. Our family walked down the aisle, my father leading with Crystal at his side, while I trailed behind, hymn book clutched against me. Pastor Davis greeted us warmly at the door. "Good to see you, Henry, and this must be your fine son." His eyes went straight to Crystal, as if I were invisible. My father's chest swelled. "Yes, this is the one who'll carry the Beeson name forward." Congregants nearby nodded, murmuring, What a fine young man. Someone patted Crystal on the back. Not a glance turned toward me. I stood quietly, arranging the hymn books, invisible as the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. As the choir began to sing, I whispered to myself, "The squeaky wheel gets the grease." But here, speaking had always brought punishment, while silence brought erasure. I wondered which fate was worse. During the sermon, I drifted back to a memory. I was 9 years old when the pastor invited children to sing a solo for the congregation. I practiced for weeks, trembling but proud, and when I finally sang, the church filled with my voice. Afterward, my father bent down, his whisper like a blade. "Don't try to outshine your brother. People should be talking about him, not you." I carried that sentence for decades, a reminder that my light was never meant to be seen here. Sitting in the pew now, I studied the faces around me. These weren't accidents. These were choices, deliberate erasures, performed in public and reinforced by silence. I remembered a Southern saying I'd once read, "What you allow is what will continue." I wondered then, had my silence allowed them to rewrite my place in this family, to erase me with every passing year? When the service ended, the congregation spilled outside into the sunlight, trading handshakes and greetings. My father basked in the attention as Crystal stood tall beside him, soaking in the admiration. I stepped aside, ready to leave quietly, when a frail hand touched mine. An old woman, Mrs. Whitaker, leaned close. Her voice was soft but firm. "You've got your mother's eyes," she whispered. "Don't let them dim." Her words startled me, but they lodged deep. For the first time that day, I felt seen. My father might erase me in front of others. My brother might stand tall on the pedestal built for him, but here was a voice, a quiet one, that recognized me. As we walked back to the car, I held those words tight. I thought, not everyone is blind. Not everyone is deaf to who I am. That evening, back in my room, I sat replaying the day's humiliations. The cake without my name. The toast that praised only my brother. The pastor's welcome that pretended I wasn't there. And yet, the whisper of an old woman cut through it all. "Don't let them dim." Downstairs, my father and brother laughed together, the sound carrying through the thin walls. I listened, feeling both the sting of exclusion and the spark of something else, defiance. "One day," I whispered to myself, "the applause will stop, and when it does, they'll finally hear me." The cookout smelled of mesquite smoke and sizzling ribs, the kind of scene that should have warmed me. My aunts were laughing in clusters, uncles leaning over the grill trading stories, and cousins darting in and out of the barn like restless birds. The ranch yard buzzed with chatter, every corner stitched together by music and memory. Yet as I stood with a paper plate in my hand, I felt like a guest instead of a daughter. Family reunions were supposed to tie people closer, to bind the loose ends of kinship. For me, every one of these gatherings was another reminder of the gulf between what I longed for and what I lived. Instead of stitching us together, these reunions cut deeper. I found myself standing near Aunt Carol, who had always been kind enough to ask about my work. She smiled and asked, "So, Deborah, how's life treating you? You're still with the company in Dallas, right?" I nodded, relieved to have someone notice. "Yes, I've been leading a new project. It's been challenging, but I think it could open doors. I've worked hard for this, and it feels..." My father's voice cracked through the air like a whip. "Oh, don't take her too seriously, Carol. She imagines things, always has her nose in those cheap novels, dreaming up stories." Heads turned. Nervous laughter bubbled around me. Someone muttered, "Well, she's always been the dramatic one." The air thickened with condescension. My chest tightened, heat flooding my face. "I wasn't exaggerating," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's real work, and it matters." Father shook his head, his grin sharp. "Deborah, you've always been good at telling tales. Don't confuse that with reality." The laughter returned, stronger this time. My words were erased, my truth flipped upside down in front of everyone. I could feel the corner I was pushed into. They weren't just ignoring me, they were painting me as unstable, unreliable. Gaslighting wasn't just a private weapon. Here, it was a performance for the entire family to watch. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep breathing. Inside, though, the betrayal stung sharper than the words themselves. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." The injustice at this table wasn't only what was said to me, it was the laughter that followed, the silent approval that made it thrive. As I set my plate down untouched, my mind pulled me back to another humiliation, one that had shaped me years earlier. I was 17, standing in the crowded hallway of my high school. Crystal had one arm draped over his buddy's shoulder, the other pointing squarely at me. "This is my loser sister," he announced to a cluster of classmates. "Don't expect much." The laughter was instant and cruel. Faces I knew, faces I'd sat beside in class, snickered and smirked. I froze, clutching my books to my chest, words stuck in my throat. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but my voice vanished. I turned and saw through the glass doors of the school. My father's truck idled at the curb. He was sitting there, watching. For one brief second, I thought he would step in, call Crystal out, maybe even protect me. Instead, I watched him nod with quiet pride, his lips curving upward just slightly. Approval. He had approved of Crystal mocking me. That memory still burned years later, the betrayal not in my brother's words, but in my father's silence. Back at the cookout, the sounds of laughter and conversation swirled around me, but it felt more like static than harmony. Both home and school had been unsafe spaces. My brother humiliated me, my father endorsed it, and the community either ignored it or laughed along. When everyone laughs, I thought, silence becomes its own kind of violence. The humiliation at school and the gaslighting here were not random wounds. They were links in a chain, welded together by silence and complicity. This wasn't my imagination. It was a system built to erase me. I studied the faces of my relatives around the table, their smiles, their nods, their laughter. It wasn't malice, but it was enough to bury me under a narrative I never agreed to. Yet, as painful as it was, I could also see the outline of truth. I wasn't imagining the pattern. I wasn't inventing the dismissal. This was deliberate, and seeing it clearly was its own form of strength. I slipped quietly away from the crowd, finding a quiet corner of the porch. The air outside was cooler, the hum of cicadas steady in the dusk. From my bag, I pulled out a small notebook, one I had carried for months but rarely used. Tonight, it became my weapon. I opened to a blank page and began writing. The words spoken, the laughter that followed, the nod of my father's head. I recorded it all, not to share now, but to remind myself later that these patterns were real. They weren't the fictions he accused me of spinning. They were my truth. My hand trembled as I wrote, but I remembered my mother's voice, soft and steady, from years ago. When you feel invisible, write yourself back into the story. That sentence steadied me. I clung to it as if it were rope thrown into deep water. Maybe I couldn't confront them head-on tonight. Maybe my voice would be drowned out by their laughter, but my words on paper couldn't be denied. The gathering eventually thinned. Relatives drifted away, leaving the yard quiet except for the crackle of dying coals. I remained outside, notebook on my lap, staring up at the wide Texas sky littered with stars. Crystal walked past, his boots crunching against gravel. He paused, leaning against the porch rail, smirk tugging at his lips. "You'll never change the story, Deborah," he said casually, almost amused. "Dad already wrote it." I tightened my grip on the notebook, meeting his gaze. My voice was quiet but steady. "Maybe he wrote the beginning, but the ending will be mine." Crystal laughed, shaking his head as he walked away. I didn't look back at him. Instead, I looked at the page in my notebook, the ink still fresh, and felt the seed of something stronger than silence take root. The house was quieter than usual after the gathering, but the quiet wasn't restful. It was thick, oppressive, pressing against me the way heavy humidity settles in the chest. Every creak of the old wooden floor carried louder than it should. Every shift of the air in the hall sounded like a warning. The fire in the living room had burned low, leaving only the faint smell of smoke clinging to the rafters. I sat on the edge of my bed, shoes still on, listening. Silence after humiliation is heavier than the laughter that caused it, I thought. And tonight, that silence felt unbearable. Then I heard them, footsteps in the hall, slow, deliberate. I froze, waiting. The steps drew closer, then stopped just outside my door. My breath caught as the doorknob rattled, followed by a sharp knock that didn't wait for permission. I opened the door slightly, and there he was. Crystal leaned in the dim light, shoulders squared, grin sharp as a blade. "You think you're clever, Deborah," he said, his voice a low growl. "Talking to relatives, trying to twist things your way?" I stepped into the hallway, forcing myself not to retreat. "I only told the truth. You don't get to decide how my life is remembered." In a flash, he shoved me against the wall, his forearm pressing into my shoulder. The wooden panels groaned under the force. His face hovered inches from mine, breath thick with the scent of whiskey. "You'll never escape," he hissed. "Dad will never believe you. He's told everyone what you are. You think you can rewrite the story? This ranch has no room for liars." His grip closed around my wrist, sharp pain shooting up my arm as his fingers dug into the bone. I tried to yank free, but he tightened, leaving marks that I knew would bruise. "Let go, Crystal," I snapped, forcing my voice steady. "One day, people will see you for what you are." His smile widened. "Not while I'm standing here." "And I always will be." With a sudden shove, he released me, sending me stumbling back into my room. The door slammed shut between us, and I heard his boots thud away down the hall. His final words carried back to me. "You'll thank us one day. You'll see this was all for your own good." I leaned against the door, heart pounding. Fear wasn't only in his fists. It was in the certainty that no one would protect me. That certainty hollowed me, but anger began to fill the space it left behind. I turned toward my desk, hoping work would steady me, and noticed the drawer ajar. My stomach dropped. I rushed forward, pulling it open, and found scraps of paper torn and scattered. I gathered them with shaking hands, piecing together what I already knew. It was my scholarship letter, my chance at leaving this ranch, gone. I remembered the day I wrote the essay. I had sat at the same desk, pouring myself into every line, describing why I wanted to study, to leave, to become something more than what this land allowed me to be. When the acceptance letter came, I cried, not because I doubted I could make it, but because it was proof that someone else believed I could. And now, it lay in tatters. I stayed awake until morning, fury simmering just beneath my skin. At breakfast, I carried the torn pieces into the kitchen and laid them on the table between us. My father glanced up from his coffee, his expression unreadable. "Why was my scholarship letter torn apart?" I asked, my voice sharp. He didn't flinch. "You're needed here," he said coldly. "We don't waste time on foolish fantasies." This wasn't a fantasy. It was my future. He set his cup down with a hard clink. "Your place is here. That letter never mattered. What matters is this ranch, this family. You'll do as you're told." The betrayal cut deeper than Crystal's threats. My father knew, and he had allowed it, maybe even ordered it. I walked away from the table, each step heavy with the truth I could no longer ignore. This wasn't coincidence. The humiliation at church, the mockery from relatives, the threats in the hall, and now the destruction of my only escape. It was a system designed to trap me. Alice Walker once said, "The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any." I repeated that line silently until it sank into me. They wanted me to believe I was powerless, that silence was my only option. But I wasn't powerless, not if I refused to be. That night, I returned to my room and carefully tucked the torn pieces of the letter into my notebook. They were proof, not of failure, but of sabotage. Evidence I would keep safe. "If they think silence will keep me trapped," I whispered to myself, "they don't know me at all." I remembered my mother once telling me, long before she passed, "A locked door doesn't mean there's no exit. It means you haven't found the key yet." I held on to that thought like a lifeline. My key would not be strength in my fists. It would be knowledge, memory, and evidence. I locked my door for the first time that night, sitting upright in bed, listening to the footsteps that still paced the hall. Crystal's laughter drifted through the darkness, cruel and certain. "Dad says you'll thank us one day. he called softly, the words sliding under my door like smoke. I pressed my hand against the notebook under my pillow and whispered back, "One day, I'll make sure the world hears me, even if you don't." The house had long since fallen quiet, but I remained awake, sitting at my desk with the lamp dimmed low. In my lap was the notebook where I'd hidden the torn pieces of my scholarship letter, edges jagged like wounds that refused to close. I traced them with my fingertips, as if touching them might mend what had been taken. My mother's lullaby returned to me in fragments, soft as breath. She used to sing it while folding laundry, the melody floating through the house like a promise that even hard days could end in gentleness. I closed my eyes, almost hearing her voice. It had been years, yet it lingered, steady and full of love. And then the letter. I kept it tucked away in an envelope, her last words to me written in careful script. "You deserve to be loved, always." It was proof that once I mattered to someone beyond the confines of this ranch. Proof that I wasn't the burden my father insisted I was. That letter became my anchor. Without it, I might have believed his lies. I whispered aloud to myself, "When you feel invisible, write yourself back into the story." Those were my mother's words, and tonight they burned brighter than the shame Crystal tried to heap on me. I imagined her beside me, whispering encouragement, reminding me that my life was meant for more than silence. I also imagined my father, his voice as cold as steel, calling my dreams a waste of time. The two voices clashed inside me, one urging me to rise, the other to shrink. For the first time, I decided which I would listen to. "Courage is not the absence of fear," I murmured, recalling a line I once read. "It's deciding something else matters more." And in that moment, what mattered more was refusing to let their story erase mine. The morning came gray and heavy. I pulled on my boots and stepped outside, the chill biting at my arms. Chores waited, as they always did. Buckets to fill, fences to mend, cattle to herd. What once felt like part of the rhythm of life now felt like shackles, every chore another reminder of the cage I lived in. Crystal strutted across the yard, already boasting. "Dad says I'll be heading out to college next fall," he announced loud enough for neighbors passing on the road to hear. "Some of us have futures worth investing in." He smirked at me, enjoying the way the words stung. My father, standing nearby, didn't correct him. Instead, he repeated the mantra that had been carved into me since childhood. "This land needs hands, not dreams. Remember that, Deborah." I swallowed the anger burning in my throat and turned back to the fence I was repairing. The barbed wire cut into my gloves, and I stared at it until my vision blurred. The wire was more than just steel. It was the perfect metaphor for this place. A boundary, a prison. Each twist of metal seemed to whisper, "You're trapped." Neighbors drove by in their trucks, honking and waving at Crystal. Not one of them looked my way. To them, I was background, a shadow moving through chores. Resentment pressed against my chest so tight I could hardly breathe. Still, I worked, because working gave me time to think, and thinking gave me strength. By noon, I caught myself humming under my breath. It was my mother's lullaby again, but now it sounded different. Less of a memory, more of a declaration. Each note felt like a refusal, an act of resistance. Crystal noticed. He stopped near the barn, laughing. "Still singing like a little girl? No wonder Dad never takes you seriously." I straightened, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Better to sing," I said calmly, than to choke on silence. The words caught him off guard. His grin faltered. For the first time, he didn't have a quick retort. He muttered something under his breath and stormed off, boots kicking up dust. The air felt lighter as he left. He wasn't used to me answering back, not even with calmness. And in that moment, I saw it. The flicker of fear that I wasn't as compliant as he believed. That evening, the sun stretched itself across the Texas sky, setting fire to the horizon. I sat on the porch with my notebook on my lap, writing everything down. The threats, the dismissals, the erased opportunities. Each page became a testimony, a map of survival. "Every fence post I drive into this land," I wrote, "is another page of their control. But one day, this journal will be my escape." The words felt like a vow. My body might be bound to this ranch, but my mind was free. They could mock me, bruise me, call me invisible, but my thoughts belonged to me alone. I thought of Edward Bulwer Lytton's line, "The pen is mightier than the sword." I finally understood it. My notebook was my weapon, sharper than their fists, more lasting than their silence. As the last light faded, I tucked the notebook under my mattress, heart steady. My father's voice carried through the hall, as sure as ever. "Your place is here. Don't forget it." I pressed my hand to the mattress and whispered back, "My place is wherever I decide to stand." I woke with a throb in my wrist, the bruises purpling deeper overnight. Every time I flexed my hand, pain shot up my arm like fire. I sat up slowly, listening to the house. The morning sun hadn't fully risen, and the silence of the ranch pressed in. My first thought was to wrap my wrist and push through the chores, what I had always done. But this time, I hesitated. In a town like this, I told myself, secrets spread faster than wildfire. But silence can kill you just as fast. I stared at my wrist, swollen and ugly. I could hide it, yes, but hiding only meant they had succeeded. For once, I wanted someone outside these walls to see. I dressed quietly, pulled a sweater over my arm, and drove myself into town. Every bump in the dirt road made my wrist ache, but I gripped the wheel tighter. I told myself this was not weakness, it was survival. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and coffee. A nurse looked up as I checked in, her eyes softening when she saw me cradle my arm. "What happened?" she asked, leading me into a room. I hesitated. My mouth opened, but words caught. Finally, I whispered, "It wasn't an accident." She leaned closer. "Do you want to tell me who did this?" Before I could answer, the door swung open. My father stood there, hat in hand, his expression carved from stone. "She fell," he announced, his voice steady, authoritative. "My daughter's always been clumsy." The nurse froze, glancing between us. I could see conflict in her eyes. She knew something was wrong. But then she nodded, pen scratching across the chart. Accidental fall. I stared at the page, my throat tightening. Betrayal didn't need fists. It lived in the silence of those too afraid to name the truth. Even here, in a place meant to heal, I was invisible. When we left, my father put his hand on my shoulder, the gesture cold, performative. "See? All handled," he said. "No need for drama." Later that week, I walked into the feed store for supplies. The air smelled of hay and molasses, and men leaned on counters swapping stories. I moved quietly between aisles when I heard my father's voice carry, warm and steady, like a man sharing a good-natured joke. "Deborah makes up stories for attention," he said with a chuckle. "You know how young women are." The group around him laughed. One man added, "She's always been dramatic." Another shook his head. "Smart girl, but prone to exaggeration." I froze, a sack of feed heavy in my arms. They didn't see me in the corner, but I heard every word. My father's smile never wavered as he poisoned the air, planting doubt in every ear. Gaslighting at home was survival. But here, in town, it was execution. My reputation wasn't just diminished, it was buried under his words. I set the bag on the counter, the sound louder than I intended. Heads turned briefly, then looked away. No one spoke to me. I paid quickly and walked out, heat rising in my chest. Rage and humiliation coiled together until I thought I'd choke on them. Driving back, the pieces connected in my mind. The torn scholarship letter, the relatives laughing when he dismissed me, Crystal's threats in the hall, and now the slander in public. This wasn't protection, it was erasure, disguised as care. I remembered Eleanor Roosevelt's words I once read in a dog-eared book. "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I clenched the wheel. They wanted me to believe I was powerless, but the truth was I still held one weapon they didn't control, my own record of events. When I reached my room that evening, I pulled out my notebook. Each page became a battlefield. I wrote down dates, times, exact words. My wrist ached, but I forced the pen across the paper until the ink stained my fingers. Every entry was testimony, proof that my life wasn't a fantasy. The door creaked open. Crystal leaned in, smirking. Writing fairy tales again? I lifted my eyes, calm. No, I'm writing the truth, and one day the world will read it. He blinked, unsettled. For once, he had no ready insult. He muttered something and shut the door harder than necessary. The silence that followed didn't crush me, it steadied me. For the first time, I felt the shift. The fear no longer belonged only to me. That night, I lay in bed, the notebook hidden beneath my pillow. My father's footsteps passed down the hall. His voice, low and certain, seeped through the wood. Stories won't save you, girl. I turned my face toward the ceiling, whispering into the dark. Stories built nations. Mine will break your kingdom. The living room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp in the corner. My father sat in his chair, boots planted firmly, glass of whiskey in hand. He began reminiscing, his voice low and deliberate. Your mother always favored your brother, he said, his eyes never leaving the amber swirl in his glass. You were never her choice. The words landed like a blow. I gripped my notebook tighter under the table, knuckles whitening, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. That's not true, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned forward, gaze piercing. Your mother wanted a strong heir. That was Crystal, not you. You've always been a burden, Deborah. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. The memory of my mother's letter, tucked safely in my room, burned bright in my mind. You deserve to be loved, always. That was her truth, not his. Quietly but firmly, I answered, that's not what her letter says. His head snapped up. Letter. You're fantasizing again, he scoffed, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly. Always making up stories to make yourself feel important. Inside, grief twisted into defiance. He wasn't just erasing me, he was erasing her, the woman who had sung me to sleep, who had whispered hope into my ears when no one else would. My father's lies tried to bury her memory, but I held onto it fiercely. The silence thickened, heavy enough to suffocate. I bit my tongue, choosing not to argue further. Instead, I sat straighter, letting the silence speak for me. He thought it was weakness. I knew it was strategy. That night, lying awake, I drifted back to another memory, one colder than the words he had just spoken. I was 15, my face swollen from a fight with Crystal. He had shoved me against the barn wall after I dared to question him, my lips split, blood running down my chin. Panicked, I ran across the fields, tears stinging, heart hammering, and found myself at the neighbor's porch. I pounded on the door, my fists raw. Please, I cried, please help me. The door cracked open. Mrs. Jenkins peeked out, her eyes wide. She saw the blood, the trembling. For a moment, I thought she might let me in. Instead, her voice was a whisper, sharp with fear. We can't get involved. Your father is too powerful. And she shut the door. I stood there, shaking, humiliated, the night air cold against my skin. The porch light blinked out, leaving me alone in the dark. That humiliation still burned like an open wound. It wasn't just family silence. It was community complicity. Years later, Edmund Burke's words echoed in my mind. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. I realized then it wasn't just my father and brother against me. It was an entire web of silence, stretching across relatives, neighbors, even professionals who looked away. The truth wasn't just stolen at home, it was silenced everywhere I turned. But lying there in bed, staring at the ceiling, I began to see silence differently. It wasn't only their weapon, it could be mine too, if I used it wisely. In my notebook, I wrote carefully, don't fight every battle. Choose the battlefield. I would not waste energy shouting against laughter. I would not give them more to twist into lies. I would listen. I would observe. I would gather every word they spoke, every slight, every threat. Silence would sharpen me. The next day, I kept my composure. When Crystal mocked me, I smiled faintly instead of snapping. When my father dismissed me, I nodded, taking mental notes. Their arrogance made them sloppy. They didn't notice me collecting their weapons as my own. At dinner, my father pointed his fork at me. "Even your mother knew you were nothing," he muttered. I felt the sting, but instead of rising to defend myself, I simply gripped my notebook tighter under the table. "Inside," I whispered, "you can rewrite her memory all you want, but the truth lives in me." That night, I stood at my window, staring out at the neighbor's house, the same house where a door had once shut in my face. Darkness filled the windows, but I no longer felt the same abandonment. They closed the door once, I thought, but next time the world will open its eyes. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the old boards creaking softly as the wind shifted outside. The night had its own weight on this ranch, a silence that seemed thicker than darkness. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, uneasy with a sense I couldn't name. The air carried something dangerous, though no sound betrayed it yet. Then, the wooden clock in the hall struck 3. 1, 2, 3. Each chime made my heart pound faster, echoing in my ribs. I pulled the thin blanket higher, though the heat pressed against me. I told myself to breathe steady, to wait out the unease. But the footsteps came. Slow at first, heavy boots dragging against the floor. They stopped outside my door. The pounding that followed rattled the hinges. Evil doesn't always knock, I thought. Sometimes it breaks the door down. The door swung open with a crash. Crystal burst in, his face twisted in rage, eyes bloodshot, fists already clenched. "Get up!" he shouted, his voice thick with drink and fury. I barely had time to sit upright before his hand clamped down on my arm. He yanked me from the bed and slammed me against the wall. The impact sent pain shooting through my shoulder, my head spinning. "Stop, please, this isn't who you have to be," I gasped, trying to hold on to the edge of the nightstand for balance. "This is who Dad says I am," he bellowed, his breath hot in my face. "The strong one, the heir." His fist connected with my jaw. Pain exploded. I tasted blood, metallic and bitter. I staggered, tried to shove him back, but he was larger, heavier. His rage filled every inch of the room. And then I saw him, my father, standing in the doorway, arms crossed. He wasn't startled. He wasn't even moving to stop it. He watched, calm, steady, as if this were nothing but a test. "Dad," I choked, voice breaking as another blow knocked me to my knees. "Help me." But my father's lips curled faintly into something that resembled a smile. Not joy, not laughter, approval. Terror froze me where I knelt. Betrayal carved deeper than Crystal's fists. I realized then it wasn't rage out of control. It was permission. Crystal shoved me again, and I hit the floor hard, the wood cold against my cheek. I lifted my eyes, locking on my father. My gaze begged him, pleaded with him, to intervene. His answer was colder than anything I could have imagined. "You've always been a burden," he said flatly. "Tonight, you finally bow." The words sliced sharper than fists. My chest heaved, not just with pain but with heartbreak. His indifference was worse than my brother's violence. His silence cut deeper because it told me I was never worth defending. His smile cut deeper than my brother's fists, I thought, blood seeping from my lip. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The hottest place in hell is reserved for those who remain neutral in times of moral crisis." My father wasn't neutral. His neutrality was a weapon. Crystal laughed, stomping his boot into my ribs. I screamed, the sound muffled against the floorboards. Still, my father didn't move. He only turned away, as if my suffering were the natural order of things. Somewhere inside me, faint but alive, survival sparked. I began crawling inch by inch toward the door. Each breath burned, each movement stabbing through my ribs. Crystal's boot came down hard on my back, laughter dripping with cruelty. "Stay down, Deborah! You're nothing!" I whispered my mother's lullaby under my breath, the melody trembling out of me. Each word gave me a thread of strength. I imagined her voice wrapping around me, telling me I was still here, still whole, even if broken. I looked up once more at my father, meeting his eyes. I no longer begged. I understood in that moment that I would find my survival without him. The room blurred as I crawled again, nails digging into the floor. My vision darkened. For a moment, I lost consciousness. When I woke, Crystal was standing over me, chest heaving with triumph. My father had already turned, walking down the hall, his back to me. If I survive this night, I thought, clutching my ribs with what strength I had left, I'll never beg them for love again. I pulled myself against the wall, the taste of blood thick in my mouth. My body shook, but my mind made a vow. This night would not define my end. It would define my resistance. Then came the last straw. From down the hall, my father's voice drifted back, chuckling as he told Crystal, "She finally knows her place." My eyes blurred, the wooden floor turning red beneath me. My body gave way, collapsing fully. They think this is the end, I thought, as darkness claimed me. It's not. It's the beginning of my truth. The night air slapped me cold as I stumbled out of the ranch house. My ribs screamed with every breath, and blood dripped from my nose down to my shirt. I had no shoes. The gravel tore at my feet as if the earth itself wanted to keep me here. My heart pounded with a single rhythm. Run, run, run. Dogs barked in the distance, chains rattling as they strained against fences. Porch lights flicked on as I passed, silhouettes of neighbors peering through curtains. Their eyes caught me for seconds before the blinds snapped shut. No one stepped outside. No one came forward. The whole town has ears, I thought, but none has the courage to listen. The streets stretched endless under the pale wash of moonlight. Each step stabbed, but each step was also freedom, even if fragile. The silence of my family had chased me out into a silence that wrapped the whole town. I clutched my side where Crystal's boot had landed hardest, pain radiating sharp with every movement. Every breath felt like fire tearing through my lungs, yet I kept moving, forcing my legs to carry me forward. My mother's words whispered from memory. When the night feels endless, run toward the light. I searched the horizon, and there it was, the faint glow of the police station sign flickering red and blue in the distance. My vision blurred, but that light anchored me. If I can make it there, I whispered, stumbling against the curb, maybe, just maybe, they'll see me. Crystal's voice echoed in my skull, cruel and certain. Dad will never believe you. I pushed harder, each step a rebellion against that voice. The closer I got, the more the world narrowed into a tunnel of light and shadow. The sound of my breath roared in my ears. My bare feet left smudges of blood along the sidewalk. At last, I reached the doors. They seemed impossibly heavy, but I shoved them open with the last of my strength. The room froze. Officers looked up from their desks, eyes wide at the sight of me, bloodied, shaking, gasping for air. My brother, my dad. I tried to speak, but the words dissolved into coughs, thick and raw. One officer rose quickly. "Ma'am, sit down. What happened?" I pointed weakly at my ribs, but my knees buckled. The edges of my vision darkened. My eyes caught the American flag in the corner of the room, its colors muted in the fluorescent light. A cruel reminder of promises of justice that so often failed to reach houses like mine. I collapsed before I could finish my plea. "Call EMS now!" a young officer shouted, kneeling beside me. His hands pressed gently against my shoulder to steady me. "Stay with us, ma'am. We've got you." The room blurred in and out as voices overlapped, radios crackled, phones rang. "Justice delayed is justice denied," a line I'd once read flashed in my mind. And here I was, body broken, justice still a far-off thing. Paramedics burst through the door minutes later, their stretcher rolling fast. Hands lifted me, secured me, voices barking orders. "BP's dropping, move, move." I drifted in and out, flashes of memory pulling me under. My mother's lullaby, Crystal's fists, my father's cold smile as he turned away. Each image seared into me, refusing to fade. They think I'm broken, I thought weakly, but the truth doesn't collapse with me. The siren wailed as they loaded me into the ambulance. Red lights painted the night, bouncing off storefront windows as we sped down the street. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, but I felt my chest rise and fall with each shallow breath. Inside the station, as I faded, I caught fragments of voices. Her father, Henry Beeson. "This is going to be messy." A senior officer muttered the words low, but they reached me anyway. Some of them knew him. Some of them feared him. Complicity wasn't just in the neighbor's silence. It lived here too. But this time was different. I was inside the very institution meant to protect. They couldn't shut the door on me like Mrs. Jenkins once had. My broken body was evidence they couldn't deny. Darkness pulled at me again. My head lolled to the side, hearing one final voice close and urgent. "Ma'am, stay with us. You're safe now." Safe? I asked myself in silence. Or silenced again? The world went black, my fate uncertain, but inside me something steadied. My body surrendered, but my truth had begun to gather its own army. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and dust, sunlight filtering through tall windows and catching on the worn benches. My body still carried the bruises, ribs tender and wrist-bound, but my mind had never been sharper. As I stepped inside, the room shifted. Neighbors turned, relatives hushed. Even church members who once averted their eyes leaned in to see me walk down the aisle. For years I had begged for help, knocked on doors, whispered for rescue. They turned their backs. But now they had no choice but to watch. I tightened my grip on the notebook in my hand, each page a shield forged from silence I had learned to weaponize. The judge, stern and deliberate, sat at the bench. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as my father and brother were led in. My father held himself rigid, chin high, as if this were nothing more than an inconvenience. Crystal scowled, jaw tight, glaring at me with familiar venom. I sat straighter. Let them look. Let them hear. "Court is in session," the judge announced. My attorney rose first, placing a stack of documents on the desk. His voice was steady, resonant. "Your Honor, we present evidence of fraudulent deeds transferring the Beeson Ranch solely to Crystal Beeson, intentionally excluding Deborah Jackson from her legal rights as a co-heir." Whispers erupted in the gallery. Heads turned toward my father, brows raised. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Proceed." "Mr. Beeson," my attorney said, pacing toward my father, "did you knowingly remove your daughter's rights to the ranch?" My father's jaw tightened. He leaned into the microphone, voice cold. "I protected what was mine." Gasps echoed. My stomach twisted. It was never his. It was ours, and he knew it. I thought of his old words. This land needs hands, not dreams. All this time, I believed it was his warped sense of duty. Now I saw the truth. It was greed, nothing more. The tension thickened as my father refused to meet my eyes. For once, the mask he wore before the town cracked, but not enough. He still thought silence would carry him through, but I had carried silence too long. When my turn came, I stood, knees trembling, but voice steady. My attorney nodded, and I pulled out my phone. The courtroom shifted, curious, murmurs swelling. "Your Honor," I began, voice sharp with controlled emotion, "I submit audio evidence recorded on the night of July 3rd. The judge gestured. "Play it." The speakers filled with sound, the crash of my door, Crystal's fists striking, my cries filling the dark. And then, faint but unmistakable, my father's chuckle. The room froze. Gasps burst out. Someone covered their mouth. An aunt who once laughed at my father's dismissals shook her head in disbelief. For the first time, my father shifted uncomfortably, fingers drumming the table. I steadied my voice, though it cracked. That laugh hurt more than any bruise. It told me I was never his daughter, only his silence. The words hung in the courtroom, heavy as stone. Dwight L. Moody once said, "Character is what you are in the dark." The dark had revealed my father's truth, and now the light forced everyone to see it. The silence that followed was not the silence I grew up with. It was not erasure. It was exposure. From behind me, I heard whispers ripple. "We had no idea," one woman said. "All these years?" Another murmured. The judge leaned forward, voice sharp. "This is not protection. This is abuse. And this is fraud." His gavel struck once, the sound reverberating through every heart in the room. I felt the shift. The silence that once imprisoned me now condemned them. My mother's words from her letter pulsed in my chest. You deserve to be loved. I realized then that love did not live in their silence. Love was here, in the truth I had finally spoken. The judge's voice carried finality. Fraud charges will proceed. Custody of the ranch is hereby frozen pending trial. Gasps again. My father's legacy, the thing he clung to above all, began to crumble publicly. Crystal's eyes locked on me, full of hatred, but for once his threats carried no weight. His fists, his boots, his cruelty, none of it mattered here, not against the truth. I sat taller, breath steady, whispering to myself, "This is the sound of silence breaking." The gavel struck again. As I left the courthouse, reporters surged. Townsfolk pressed close, voices calling my name now instead of ignoring it. Through the noise, I heard my father hiss, his words for me alone. "This isn't over." I met his gaze, unflinching. My voice was quiet, but it cut sharper than any blade. "It is for you." The steady hum of machines was the first sound I registered as I opened my eyes. The hospital ceiling above me was blank, sterile and unfamiliar, yet my ribs beneath the bandages reminded me exactly why I was here. Breathing was still sharp and shallow, but the silence of the room was deafening after the storm of the courthouse. My mind raced back to the gavel, the gasps, the moment my father's mask cracked in front of everyone. Healing hurts worse than the wound, I thought. The body forces you to remember. Every ache brought me back to a fist, a word, a silence that carved me down. I shifted against the stiff sheets, grimacing, yet a strange calm spread through me. I had survived worse nights than this, and this time, the world had finally seen what I carried alone for so long. The door creaked open. A figure stood hesitant, then stepped in. It was Mr. Grady, my old English teacher. His hair was grayer, his shoulders slightly stooped, but his eyes softened when they met mine. "I told you once," he said quietly, pulling a chair closer, "to call me if you ever needed help. You never did." I swallowed hard. I didn't think anyone would believe me. He sighed, shaking his head. "I regret not speaking sooner. I saw things, signs. The way you came to class with bruises, the way you shrank when your father showed up at school. I should have done more." "You did now," I whispered, clutching the blanket. "That matters." His hand pressed mine, warm and firm. "You gave your voice when it mattered most. That's something no one can erase." Tears stung, but they didn't fall. Gratitude mingled with bitterness. A quiet closure that came too late, but came nonetheless. Silence could be broken, even after years. Later, as I rested, the weight of family pressed into me once again. My father left the courtroom without acknowledging guilt, his shoulders stiff, his pride still clinging to shreds of control. Crystal glared at me, venom burning in his stare, but his fists and threats had lost their weight under the gavel's strike. Relatives who once chuckled when I was dismissed now avoided my eyes. Some turned their heads, others muttered excuses, their complicity unraveling under shame. The family I fought to belong to was gone, I thought. But maybe it was never mine at all. Grief curled in me, not for losing them, but for realizing they had chosen silence over me every time. I didn't need to chase what was never mine. Sometimes you don't get closure, you just move forward. That sentence echoed like a truth I had known but never accepted. I pressed my notebook to my lap, the record of every wound, every silence I survived. My father had given my brother land, lies, and fists. But my mother, she had given me her words, her lullaby, her letter. She gave me voice. My father gave my brother the land, I whispered to myself. My mother gave me her voice. I know which one lasts longer. I looked out the window toward the hill country horizon, imagining a life beyond Willow Ridge. Dallas, maybe, or Austin. A city where no one knew my name yet, where silence did not define me. For the first time, the thought of leaving did not feel like running. It felt like choosing. Before discharge, I opened my notebook one last time in that hospital bed. The pages that once bled pain now carried purpose. I began writing not about bruises, but about rebuilding. Freedom isn't about forgetting the cage, it's about teaching others how to unlock it. The words came steady, a vow forming with each line. I would not let others vanish into silence the way I had. My story would not end with me. It would begin again with those who needed a voice. When the nurse wheeled me out, the courthouse loomed across the street. I asked her to stop. Slowly, I stepped out, leaning on my cane, ribs aching with each movement. The steps were crowded with reporters, microphones thrust forward. "Do you have anything to say about your father and brother?" one called out. I paused. The sun dipped low over Texas hill country, painting the sky in bruised gold and purple. My voice came calm, even. Silence speaks loud enough. And I walked forward, steady, toward a future of my choosing. I woke to the sound of my own breath, shallow but steady. The hospital room was dim, the blinds half closed, casting slivers of light across the floor. Sweat dampened my forehead, and for a moment I thought I was back at the ranch, caught in that night again. The dream lingered, my mother's voice, soft but urgent. Run toward the light, not away from it. I heard her as clearly as if she were by my bed, rocking me like she once did. But the dream twisted quickly, shadows closing in, the slam of doors, fists breaking silence, my father's smile sharp as a knife. I sat up, chest aching, ribs protesting, clutching the thin hospital blanket. That nightmare had haunted me before the 3 a.m. attack. Back then, I thought it was fear. Now I knew it was prophecy. I survived because I listened, because I ran. The hum of machines filled the quiet, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't alone. By the time I returned to the courthouse, the room was packed tighter than ever. Wooden benches creaked beneath the weight of neighbors, reporters, and townsfolk who once looked away. My father sat stiff in his suit, Crystal restless beside him. Both wore the same arrogance, but their eyes betrayed cracks. My attorney laid out the final evidence. The fraudulent deeds transferring the ranch to Crystal, the tape of my father's cruel laugh, the testimony of my old teacher who admitted he saw signs but was too afraid to speak until now. The judge listened, stern, immovable. The crowd whispered, gasps cutting through the silence like blades. My father kept his jaw clenched, refusing to look at me. Finally, the judge leaned forward. "Mr. Beeson, you used silence as a weapon. You silenced your daughter, your community, and you thought that silence would protect you. Today, that silence convicts you." The gavel struck once, sharp as thunder. Fraud proven. Custody of the ranch stripped. Charges upheld. Sentences handed down. My father's empire crumbled not in secret, but in front of everyone. I stood, feeling the weight lift from my chest. "And today," I said clearly, "I take my name back." For the first time, the silence in the courtroom was mine, not forced, but chosen. And in that silence, I was heard. Outside, cameras flashed, microphones pressed close. I didn't rage, I didn't cry. My voice came steady, carrying further than fists or whispers ever could. Silence never protects, it only chains you. I broke mine, and I'll never wear it again. The crowd quieted. Even those who once gossiped or turned me away leaned forward, listening. Not to my father, not to my brother. To me. I remembered Martin Luther King Jr.'s words. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. For years, my life had been ending. Now it had begun. Later, back in the hospital, I held my mother's necklace in one hand and my notebook in the other. The pages brimmed with years of silence turned to testimony, pain turned to record. I whispered into the quiet, "I'll make sure no one else is erased the way I was." Plans formed in my mind, an organization, a safe place for survivors, something lasting, something louder than a ranch and stronger than fear. Albert Camus once wrote, "Freedom is nothing else but a chance to be better." I would make my freedom count. When I was discharged, I stood once more on the courthouse steps. The ranch loomed faint in the distance, but I felt no pull to return. It was no longer my cage. "My freedom isn't in the land," I said softly. "It's in the truth I carry forward." I turned away, walking steady, Each step a claim of my own life. That day, I understood. Revenge wasn't fists or fire. Revenge was truth spoken so loud it shattered every lie. And freedom? Freedom is never given. It's claimed. I walked into the sunset, the warmth on my face, my mother's lullaby echoing faintly. No longer a haunting, now a hymn of victory.